Okay, thank you all for coming to our final panel of the conference. Our topic is the future of early stage financing. And this is going to be moderated by Luke Timmerman. Luke is at Economy. He's the national biotech editor. He's an award-winning journalist specializing in life sciences. Before Economy, he was a U.S. biotech reporter for Bloomberg News and the Seattle Times. Please join me in welcoming Luke.
All right, everybody. Thank you very much. Thanks for sticking around all the way to the end of this conference. I see that a few of you have some wine and champagne out there, so I hope you feel uninhibited to lob some questions up here at our panel, and they promise me that they will be colorful, lively, and maybe stir the pot a little bit. How's that for a challenge? So just quickly, I'll introduce the folks. I think many of you know them, but to my right, Alexis Borisy at Third Rock Ventures. Next is Brian Atwood at Versant Ventures. Margarita Chavez from AbbVie Ventures. And Srini Akkaraju, now at Sofinova. Formerly New Leaf, formerly Panorama.
Got to pay attention to keep track of it.
And Andy Schwab on the end at 5 AM Ventures. So we've got people here who really do early stage investing. We have spotted some dodo birds. Not literally. I think when I was thinking about this panel, the big story this year in biotech really has been the IPO market in biotech finance. This is quite a phenomenon. And it begs lots of questions. It makes me wonder what kind of ripple effects might come from an improvement in financing for a lot of venture-backed companies. And many people know that this IPO boom comes after a long march in the desert for early stage venture capital. What kind of effect are we going to see? Is this going to enable a lot of funds to replenish their coffers? Are they going to repeat the cycle and sort of refertilize the soil in the ecosystem, invest in new things? Who wants to take a stab at that? Are IPOs actually going to do any of this?
Well, they can't hurt, for sure, right? So in an industry that needs capital and you've got to start at the beginning and get to an exit, the more sources of capital, the better. And clearly, venture numbers, whether it's healthcare or overall, have been poor over the last 10 years. And so the IPOs, and especially the ones that have traded up very nicely and at high valuations, make everybody's numbers look better. Ultimately, whether that convinces our investors to put more money into funds, I think we'll see. The rubber's going to meet the road here probably in the next 12, 18 months. But surely it's a big help.
I can remember people in about 2009, 2010 saying, you know what, if a lot of funds don't raise by, say, 2012, they're going to turn into zombies. They're going to slowly go out of business. And sure enough, that happened, right? There's maybe half as many firms doing this. So what's the next dynamic to watch here in the next couple years? There are some firms left standing. Some of them are their return outlook is improving, I guess you could say. Are they going to be able to continue doing this? Is this going to bring in more firms off the sidelines?
Yeah, I think it's been a question we've all debated, and that is, are you zombies or are you hibernating? And I think what'll be really interesting over the next 2 years is to see how many firms that have been hibernating are actually going to be able to emerge out of the den and raise new funds. I was talking to a couple people earlier today, different funds, and what you do in hibernation or as a zombie is you basically work your existing portfolio and you hope that your investment performance improves well enough so you can go back out to the LP community and raise new funds. And on the one hand, that may be kind of hope springs eternal, but on the other hand, if you have the fund performance in order to do that, you will find money. So the real question is what's going to happen over the next couple of years for the funds that have not been investing actively but are interested in getting back into the business once they can get some new money in the door.
What kind of feedback are you getting from the LPs? I hear that the LPs have just, they've been burned. They're not happy with you guys.
Well, if you look at the gross stats of the industry, right? I mean, if you say why are LPs unhappy or why did money stop flowing or decrease into our industry, you can just look at the gross stats. I mean, they are crystal clear. If you look at sort of life sciences venture returns in any time, any year after 2000, the top performing funds, right? You're not above a 1.5x. Is any of the, and I'm not talking about the median, I'm talking about the top. That's, if you're a limited partner investor and you take a look at that in general, why would you invest in that? I think clearly the current environment is a positive thing, right? I think as was says, it's good. And I think it's awakening a lot of people remembering what this industry can do, what sort of the returns can be. I think from the overall LP community, there still will be rightly a lot of skepticism in saying, okay, what are the things that will, what are the activities, what are the skill sets, what are the groups that will be able to do this on a sustainable basis? Because it's clearly not an easy thing to do. I think we also need to remember the current, the IPO window has been great here this year. Things are very good. Again, if you take sort of the overall time that we have wandered in the desert, we probably need more time at the Oasis than just 1 year to really say that you're in sort of a robust thing. The one thing that I think really has certainly me excited and other people from sort of an early stage perspective is that a lot of these companies that have recently gone public or been acquired that have been very, very successful are actually relatively early stage companies that are blowing open new big areas of science or translational medicine, really trying to do something that's going to be very important for patients and make a big difference. And seeing that being rewarded, I think that's a very, very positive thing ultimately for the conditions for more good early stage investment.
Yeah, there are also platform companies that are built to last, so to speak. I don't see as many virtual, 3-person operations going public. So is the kind of company that's getting rewarded? I mean, you must be noticing this. How is that influencing? Will that influence venture investing next year after?
I don't know. I'd like to just go back to a previous point before we jump into that. Is it good? I think probably it's good. I'm not actually 100% convinced of that. At the end of the day, it's good. It's clearly good from the perspective that we fundamentally have to reduce the cost of capital for these companies and accessing the public markets and making that more feasible, making everybody in our ecosystem understand, whether it's the venture investors that are sitting on the boards of these companies or the entrepreneurs themselves, that it's not crazy to think about accessing the public market, to not be completely fixated on a certain quantum of data that actually allows you to be an interesting story to public investors, I think is actually is a good direction for us to go. And realistically, now it's clear there's a lot of public investors out there who have made a lot of money on large cap companies who are willing to take risk on small caps. Where I'm not convinced that it's so good is, and what the ultimate downstream effects are, is that these companies, no matter what, this isn't the end game, right? Ultimately, they got to get to a drug or some kind of fundamental platform that's used by a lot of people that will generate revenues and actually ultimately generate significant value creation in those companies and ultimately be beneficial to people. And it's not clear to me, we've seen this story play out over and over and over again. A lot of companies go public based on hype and expectations, and we don't really know how to interpret the data that's sitting in front of us, because fundamentally what we do, all of us do for a living, is invest in areas where our knowledge is actually relatively incomplete. and we can look at certain possible outcomes, but there's a whole bunch of other possible outcomes that are not so great. And so people take a risk and we jump into it. And we know that many of these things are not going to actually be successful. And the ultimate downstream effect of that, I think, is perhaps greater than it has been in the past, given that the amount of money that's flowed into it, the number of companies is significantly greater.
Okay, I still don't hear anybody saying that we're going to get more venture investing in
Well, I
early
think people
stage
are nervous
because of
about
this.
it.
But I just,
Time will tell.
I just want to jump in on that point. I mean, I want to come back and say I think it is unquestionably good, for our industry, for what we do. And look, not all companies that have gone public are the same, but I think there are some very, very high quality companies in the batch that have gone public. And I think one of the things that maybe call me sort of a hopeless optimist, which might be entirely true, but I think there's something different this time. And look, ultimately time will tell, but I think we know a lot more. I think actually what these companies are, that we have a crop here that are built to last, that they're based on fundamental breakthroughs in the science and the translational medicine, but to a way and to a degree that we didn't have before. There's been an enormous consolidation of knowledge over the past decade, over the past 20 years. What we are able to do today, I think, is, I look back at when I started in this industry 20 years ago, it is utterly spectacular what we can do. And they're not all going to work, and not all the companies are built the same. But I think there are some companies in this class that have come out that are built incredibly well.
Yeah.
And I think with this strength of this market, they're now capitalized incredibly well. And I think when you see that there have been a few examples of those in the past, and those companies in the past that were built to last, that did get capitalized well, that were based on solid things, ended up more often than not thriving in the long run. And I'd just be hopeful to that. And I think we're actually I think we're moving into a much better place.
Yeah, I agree in some respects. Built to last is important, and having what is, I think, consistent about several of these companies that have gone public recently is that they actually have the capital to ride through the inevitable negative outcomes for some of their programs. Where I think it's dangerous is actually to say that we're actually in a renaissance period, because at the end of the day, we should just accept the fundamental fact. We know what percentage of how human biology works. Is it 5%? Is it 10%? It ain't 25%.
Just today, an FDA-approved drug had a major blow-up.
Absolutely right. So the vast majority of human biology and how our bodies work and how we deal with all the variation from one person to the next, we just don't know. And once we start telling ourselves we actually do know, because life is different now, is a real fast road down a long hill.
Yeah, but again, I'll just make a counterpoint on it. I agree in general what you said, but I think this is a big difference, which is there are large swaths of biology where we still just don't know. And when we invest into those, when companies pursue them, they are really high stakes games, high stakes gambles. But I think there are pieces and slivers. And again, it's the optimistic part of me that those slivers are going to grow where we actually do have a real in-depth knowledge. And I think the probabilities of technical success there are rising. Again, it's not for all programs, but I think for some. I think it's a non-trivial observation to say that in the past decade, the percentage from a drug that enters the clinic to getting approval in oncology has gone from 10% or less to most recent Tufts data was 19%. And I'm actually willing to make a prediction that as you go forward in the next 10 years, that's going to go higher. And I think that there's something fundamental that's driving that. Now, I think there's large areas where it's not true. And one of the places where in our industry things can get really confused is that people don't always make a difference. Well, you're in an area that we actually understand the basic sort of molecular medicine, or are we in an area where we're shooting wildly? And those two things are radically different games, and they're radically different investment theses. And it's definitely true. It's not everywhere. But I think there are pockets where we actually are consolidating that knowledge, and I think it's growing.
Sure, fair enough.
I was going to go to your question about whether this means there are going to be new funds.
Yeah.
So I think here's the analogy. So you grew up in the Midwest, and so you're supposed to own a Chevy or a Ford, and so you buy a Chevy as a kid, or you get a Chevy somehow, and you have it for 10 years.
Buy American?
Well, so here's the point, right? So you drive it, it's in the shop all the time, and I picked Chevy, I could have picked any, right? It's in the shop, and you buy a couple more because you're supposed to buy an American car, and all of a sudden, one day you go out and you buy a German car, and they work a lot better. Then all of a sudden there's a renaissance in the American cars, and you're supposed to go back and buy an American car again. The answer is, I think,
Tesla.
if you talk to the, well, that's a different story. If you talk to LPs, the reality is they've been burned, right? They've had the Chevys and they've been in the shop, which is biotech venture, over the last 20 years. And so ultimately, I think the people that are most interested in investing in venture and biotech are people that never invested in the first place and are now seeing it as an opportunity, which there are plenty, I mean, there are lots of those opportunities out there, but it's not the people that got burned over the last 20 years.
Well, I love that analogy, by the way. But
Because you're from the Midwest.
exactly. But
Aren't we all?
so I think the Third Rock story, Alexis, as you know, this firm was founded in 2007. And part of what you guys were able to do is that you were able to pounce on a lot of early stage, really exciting scientific ideas that, a lot of other VCs weren't quite able to when the recession hit. So you weren't burdened by, a lot of dogs in the past portfolio. You could just kind of go for it. Do you expect any other firms to just kind of emerge in this next year on some of the same grounds? Like, wow, there are opportunities in early stage biology. There are good ideas coming out of universities and being spun out of, pharma cutbacks or what have you. Will there be new firms?
Forward-looking questions are always difficult to answer.
That's why we ask them.
To the point that was being made before is that I think to the degree that there are going to be new life science funds, that they're going to be needing to make an argument of why they're doing is different from what has been done in the past 10 years. In other words, just simply saying, oh, the cycle's going up, now it's good, let's just all go and repeat, I think, taking the Chevy and the Ford example, that probably is not sufficient. Now, there's lots of different models. Third Rock, we have one, right? We're passionate believers in it. And it's a very, very hands-on, very, very early, right, going for sort of the breakthrough science and translational medicine in a big way. There's other models, right? There's lots of models, and I'm sure there's other models that are successful as well. I think we probably will see new funds. I certainly have heard of some activity that is out there.
Well, there we go.
And what those will look like, I think they'll be all trying to differentiate themselves, so to say why what they're doing is different or new. And we'll have to see what that ultimately looks like.
I want to ask Margarita a question from AbbVie. You come from the strategic point of view, right? And for a few years, strategics have been sort of helping keep this ecosystem going or trying to plug in and help syndicate deals that can't quite get syndicated. What kind of role are the syndicates, the strategics going to play?
So we as strategics are not, participating as much on this IPO boom, but we're hoping that it will encourage our potential co-investors to invest earlier, because of the past couple of years that has been the challenge. We talk to our potential co-investors and they're looking for later stage opportunities. We like to go early, 18 months to IND. The lead candidate, we're good, but it's hard to find people who invest with us. And so if we can find a fund who can come in with us, that'll be great. And if we have newer players be encouraged by this market, then that'll be a welcome addition. Welcome development. And I'm hoping that means that we'll be able to fund more early stage opportunities.
Folks have questions out there in the audience. I don't want to wait until the last 2 minutes and then have 20 hands.
There's a hand over back there.
Yeah, back in the corner.
So I'm an recovering venture capitalist. I left in 2007. Thankfully, I found entrepreneurship as my new thing. I built a company worth $200 million. I'm just doing that again. The basic thing that was broken about the venture investments of the 2000s was the amount of capital that went into these companies. So there's a lot of analysis. Actually, Watson has done some analysis. Other people have done some analysis. The amount of capital that is required for an exit was close to $140, $130 million. The average value of an exit was around $150 million. So the whole question is, where's the beef? On medical devices, it worked because it's about $20, $25 million to get to the exit. Your typical exit is $75 million, so you have a 3x return. But in the biotech, when you look at the data historically, the amount of capital that went in is very similar to what the exit value was. So what is it that you are going to do different that will allow the LPs to say, hey, here's my 5x return on these investments.
Right. So I would agree in saying that if you're building a typical product, I don't know what typical means, but if you're building a typical product engine company in a breakthrough area of science, you're going to require something on the order of $100 to $125 million that you're going to spend over a 4 or 5 year period of time till you really come someplace up the value creation curve, which means taking that idea, showing it works, moving something into the clinic, and demonstrating some really compelling clinical proof of concept data. If you're going to raise $100 to $125 million in venture dollars, I agree, the mathematics, that's not a good recipe for success that's into that. So what do you need to do in it, right? You don't want to be raising really much more than $50 million of venture capital dollars that are going into that. That can be, plus or minus or whatever. Again, it depends very much on the circumstances that come in. But the rest of that capital you need to be getting from either having built enough value in the company that you're accessing much lower cost of capital in sort of crossover rounds from public investors, or you're doing it with transformative partnerships, right? And where you're using business development dollars. A key thing where I think a lot of companies had trouble with this in the past is biobuck deals, right? Everybody got really, really into biobuck deals, and they became the big race. It's a $500 million deal, it's an $800 million deal, it's a $1 billion deal, the $2 billion deals, and it's all bogus money that is never going to happen because you said you have 10 different targets, and if they all succeed, you get a $200 million payment on each. But the reality is you'll be lucky if you get one product, and you've got measly milestones on it, and you've got a single-digit royalty, which you say is accelerating to double digits, and it's a 12% royalty if it's more than $2 billion of sales. And who cares? It's not helping you to build fundamental long-term value in the company. So the trick becomes, right, you want to go in an area that is going to be important enough, big enough, build it to last, build a really strong culture, get superstar leaders that come into it, make sure you're in an area that's at the right moment in time where you're doing it, capitalize it well up front, which is, by the way, a really risky thing because you don't want to end up $100, $125 million of venture in, but count that you can make enough value early on that you can build these partnerships where you can retain real meaningful interest in the products, retain United States rights, retain or a 50-50 profit split on your core products, not just the future ones down the road, but on your lead products so that you can actually become a real big, substantial, independent entity. And you're trying to walk that fine line. It's not an easy line to do, and I think one of the things in our industry that is actually one of the most challenging things is you need to have spectacular talent in the companies to be able to walk that fine line. And I think that's actually one of the limiting factors in building great companies.
Well, let's say you've got an idea that checks all these boxes, right, that you just laid out there.
Yeah.
Who can you call in venture capital?
It's a short list.
Yeah. I'd like some people to name names here. I'm serious.
There are 5 to 10 financial firms and 5 to 10 corporates.
That's right.
There are 20. There's a group of 20,
Yeah?
and here you've got 5 of them.
Who else?
Well, there's some great groups out there, right? I mean, you can look at some of the groups that we've done syndicate deals with on really early things. Foundation Medicine, we did that with Kleiner Perkins and with Google Ventures, which was great. You can look at some of the other companies that we've done. We've done things with Flagship, we've done things with Polaris, we've done things with Atlas. There's, wonderful groups. NEA, isn't up here. It's not a long list, ultimately, but at least it's a list. And, for any deal, we all have different strategies. We're all at different places in our portfolio. All have different portfolio constructions. So for any deal, there's going to be a subset of that group that will make sense, right, for a particular deal.
But just as a counterpoint, why syndicate? I mean, part of the answer to that is the environment's not really good for syndicating right now.
There aren't many people you can syndicate with.
As Andy and Alexis have said. But the other is, as Alexis has talked about before, if you're really intent on getting to capital efficiency, and this industry did get sloppy during the last 10 years, it did drift over $100 million to $150 million. If you say, look, I want to get really, really capital efficient, you can find deals that you can start with only $15 or $20 million. And so a lot of what we're doing right now is just doing it ourselves. And that is a strategy. It's a very high-risk strategy. There's no doubt about it. Inception is a great example of that. We're doing it in other places. But the intent is let's make sure that we're trying to figure out how to make money for our investors in a way that's consistent with the traditional venture capital model. And the traditional venture capital model has always been 10, 20, $30 million in and a 10x on top of that. That's not $1 billion valuation. It's a lot less than $1 billion. And so one of the things that we believe in at the firm is let's try and really go after the projects. There are not many of them for sure, but let's go after the projects where it's only $15 or $20 million to get it there, and we can do it on our own. And as you know, it's usually with a partner. So what we do is we get the deal to a certain place, and then we reach out to the pharma world or to the large biotech world, for example, Celgene, and say, let's buddy up on this with some non-dilutive funding. So that's another approach here. It doesn't work for the big platform ideas. It's really for very compact, usually target ideas, but it does work.
Single assets.
Single assets, that's right.
And it's one of the things.
The only thing I was going to add back to the question is that if you look at the M&A data, the number of deals that are done between preclinical and phase 2 is actually a big number. I don't know the exact percentage, but the majority of the M&A deals that are done are between preclinical and phase 2. So we should be able to build these companies for less than $50 million. And the other thing you're seeing obviously is the average deal values on the M&A side are going up, and they're very tranche, right? You get 50% of the deal up front, and you get 50% of the deal in milestones. We'll see how these milestones play out over time. But if you can get a reasonable return on the upfront, and then you obviously have the kicker from the milestones, that's how it works. But I would agree. If everything got sold for $150 million, it'd be a hard business to make this work.
But I wanted to make a point earlier about this. If you think about what's happened since 2000 and 2013, there's been, as Alexis has talked about, this relentless focus on capital efficiency, so drag 150 back to 50. But there's also been a relentless focus that's really missed by people on translation. That wasn't true before 2000, but now when you talk to venture investors and you talk to entrepreneurs, talk about John Maraganorian 5x15, everybody's really focused on taking the science and pushing it into the clinic and getting it out there as fast as possible and as capital efficient as possible. So that's another major thing that's really happened that's helped our business a lot is we've gotten away from being sloppy where we were 10 or 15 years ago to being really crisp and focused on get it into the clinic and find out what's going on.
I've heard a couple VCs say too that the management teams now just have more experience and are better at developing drugs than, say, the bubble of 2000.
For sure.
There's a lot more experience.
That's right.
One thing I just want to highlight from sort of the comments that have just been made, which I think often gets lost, people say, early stage financing, it's not monolithic, right? And the 20 firms, they don't all have the same strategy. And not all deals, not all companies should be financed the same way. Right, it's just as Brian was just saying. There's some things that make sense that they can be angel or crowdfunded. Mm-hmm. There are some things that really are sort of virtual projects. There are some things that are more substantial projects, but $20 or $30 million is the right thing. There's some that are these product engine companies that you need a lot more on. And so it's more, one of the key things is there's different capital for different types of projects that are being done. The results of those are very different companies. And oftentimes they're all conflated into the same thing. But right, it's actually a fairly complex ecosystem.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Who else has questions out there? I'm in the back.
Yeah, you just brought up crowdfunding, so as a small preclinical biotech, I'm just wondering, do you really think that crowdfunding is going to get us close to the IND where then the venture capital is more likely to come in on board and take us then into the clinic?
I think crowdfunding for drugs is a highly unlikely proposition. Of course, I'll probably eat those words having said it. But it just strikes me, right? I mean, creating INDs and making sure you have a really, really high caliber IND that's going forward does take a non-trivial amount of capital that goes into it, and it does also have non-trivial risks associated with it. I imagine that I'm sure that there could be some crowdfunding things that will happen a few times. How robust is that really in the long run? Don't know.
And is crowdfunding really any different than the friends and family rounds that we've all used for the past 30 years to start companies? So I think, obviously, it's a retail money, and if there's retail money being made in public biotechs, people will start trying to do early stage private. But I think that it's going to be a small fraction of what's absolutely necessary.
But Andy, it's much different than friends and family, isn't it? Because you're out there on the internet and you're promoting yourself on YouTube, and you can tell your story, and right? I mean, can't you reach a much broader group of accredited investors?
theoretically. But if you think about, I guess, if you think about what have been the core of Friends and Family Rounds over history, it's been smart scientists, right, with an idea and connections. And so sure, the scale's a little bit bigger, but I don't think
Those
it
guys
changes
usually
the
don't
equation.
make good videos.
Right. Well,
My worry on crowdfunding, right, which is that in our business there is a huge range in quality. So somebody can say, I've got something that's ready to go for IND. And the range of what that means is so wide. And some of the crowdfunding sites say, look, we're going to vet it, we're going to have experts. But this is hard stuff, right? It's really hard stuff to do. So can you really crowdsource the expertise that is fully vetted in it to really sort of distinguish the different levels, and will that be really apparent or not? If it's not, then then the ultimate what will happen is there'll be a series of blow-ups, and then people will decide that doing drugs by crowdfunding will be really, really risky. Now, I'm open to empiric data and to learning, right? Maybe it turns out that actually crowdfunding, what it has to go with the crowdfunding is the crowd diligence. And maybe the wisdom of the crowd can actually really well determine sort of where a given program is on that extreme range that we see in our industry. But I think that becomes a key question for any of the platforms that try to do that in the life science therapeutic space.
Question over here on the right.
So we're a software maker, so it's a lot easier for us to get money. And I'm very empathetic to the people in this room because they're very smart. They're smarter than all of us. And the question I have is this: if you were starting off, like this gentleman back here was, and you came across someone that had managed to get government funding, and also had managed to go through maybe some kind of big data program, which limited and potentially suggested some efficacy with regards to some kind of protein. Does that resonate with you in terms of helping these people kind of limit the risk of failure? Meaning that they've already gone through one phase, like NIH has reviewed their stuff, they've come through it, they've gotten something that's come out of it. And the second thing is maybe they've gone through some kind of big data program where they've said, we've run our potential protein molecules through some things. Yes, there's obviously risk, but we've radically mitigated it. We've already eliminated a lot of things before going to any kind of clinical trial. And we're down to these 3 or 4 things that show promise. Does that actually make a difference to you in terms of potentially funding a company? Is that a ridiculous question?
No. I think it's a future question. I think it's a really good question. And there is a potential. Big data is nice to say, right? But it depends on what the quality of that data, obviously, and then your ability to actually ask the right questions, query the data properly. Down the road, our utopia should be to have everybody's genotype and phenotype in a database, and their reaction to certain drugs into a database, and perhaps you can actually pull out of that the information that you're talking about. If there was enough depth of for a particular question, in terms of number of samples and in terms of how you can look around, ask questions around a particular pathway, it's possible that actually de-risks enough to want to jump into it. But it's, ultimately, again, I go back to, how much do we understand about human biology? It ain't much. And it might help us to say that's the drug to push forward, because even making that determination is not trivial.
Yeah, so I just want to play on that, because I think Sri brought this up earlier. One of the holy grails in the big data discussions is let's try and figure out a way to assemble all of the preclinical data that's owned by all of the major pharmaceutical companies. You hear them talk about that all the time because they're basically competing with each other on kind of the basis of the game of submarines, and it's fundamentally stupid. That would be a great big database. It will never happen. It will never happen. But that would be the kind of big database you'd need in order to accomplish what you're talking about. I don't think any other database actually is big enough in order to de-risk a preclinical project sufficiently so you can say, okay, let's take this into the clinic with high confidence it's going to make all the way through.
I mean, if you have biomarker data that shows the target works for a certain disease, that would definitely be compelling. We'd still have to do the same amount of diligence in whether it's the right biomarker and the right target. But yeah, that would resonate.
I think we've been talking about in silico drug discovery for 15 years. We would all love for it to work, right? I think there are lots of great ideas, and every once in a while something looks like it works, but Ultimately, it's a question of does this small molecule hit this target and do what you expect it to do. Back on the government money, I think getting government funding for anything you're doing is incredibly powerful. And whether it's early stage NIH grants or phase 3 clinical trials funded by BARDA, absolutely. And if the way to reduce the dilution on everybody from founders to shareholders, that's a great source.
Hopefully the government comes back in business some point, right? Question here in the back.
Hi, I have a question for each one of the panel, actually excluding Alexis, because your model's a little bit different in venture funding in my mind. Could each one of you please identify what early stage investing to you means?
Quanticell.
And to what phase it is?
What's that?
And give an example of that as well.
So Quanticell is a cancer stem cell biology company that it's a platform deal, and it's very, very preclinical. So it's basically target identification and lead identification.
So that would be an example of early stage.
That's very early stage.
So our definition is actually first institutional money in a deal. So we're the first institutional investor in a company, obviously with syndicate partners. So that could be everything from 2 professors in a lab, in an idea, which is about a third of what we do, and that looks like Quanticell. It can be a spin out of a big company where someone else has spent hundreds of millions of dollars developing some set of assets and it becomes available. So that's early stage for us. Or it could be a tools or diagnostic or instruments company where, again, there's some sort of prototype and you're building a business from that. For us, the whole key is to be there at the beginning and be arm in arm with an entrepreneur and build a company.
Right.
So my answer, Sufnova is actually pushing more and more towards late stage investing, and I've only been there for a few months, and I will, work hard to push a little bit and at least have a few of the opposite examples in there. But in historically, over 12 years of being a venture capitalist, I've done several deals which are drug discovery stage deal. That would be, quite frankly, for me, the earliest stage that I would do. Not, I got a target and I think it's a really great target and we're gonna start screening a chemical library. My background is biology. When I see chemists present and say we can do this and we think it's going to take 2 years to do it, I have no idea what that means, and I have no ability to actually have confidence in that period of time. And so what I'd like to get to is not ultimate predictability, because again, none of what we do is really that predictable, but at least understanding that over a 9 to 12 month period, if the biology is fundamentally, again, I'm a mechanism-based investor, so the biology is really well understood, then it's clear this is a great target, not, hey, there's some correlation and maybe this thing could be, if it works, it's going to be incredible, but it's got a 1% chance of working. I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in biology that actually says if we can get a real drug to this target, there's a real chance that something great could happen here. And we've got a bunch of molecules, we don't have a drug yet. I've done that several times where we'll take a year or sometimes at most 2 years to make analogs of the drugs that are there. That's as early as I'm willing to go.
We're willing to look at companies that have at least target validation and lead candidates. And I think the earliest, we're looking at something really early right now coming out of academia that pretty much just has that target validation and a molecule.
Good question. Other questions from the audience? I wanted to come back to one point that came up on a panel yesterday. One of the public company investors, Evan McCullough, was talking about, he's worried about this November lockup period, that there's going to be some massive stampede to the exits by the VCs, and it's going to drive down the stocks. And when I heard that, I thought, I've been asking the same thing and wondering, because you have a lot of VC firms that have been marching through the desert for all these years, right? Desperate for liquidity, a drink of water. And are we supposed to believe that, when they get there, they're only going to take just a little sip at the Oasis and then a little sip 2 months from now and after that? Or could VCs end up, shooting themselves in the foot here? Trying to drink it all at once.
Depends on I haven't participated that much in the public markets, only a little bit. I think it depends on the company, and some of these companies, absolutely, there's going to be a rush to the door and take money off the table. I think there's going to be a bigger rush to the door actually from the public investors that participate in those guys get paid at the end of the year. And if they're up on an IPO 30 or 40 or 50%, they're damn well going to get paid. And that's actually a little bit of an odd, I think, kind of silly dynamic in this business. But it's life, right? If you're going to incentivize somebody to get paid by capturing profit at this period of time, they're going to do it. And that's going to cause some of these stocks to come down, maybe more than the venture guys.
I think what gives variability to the answer to the question is what's each firm's bogey for multiple. And there are firms that are 3 or 4 or 5x, and there are firms that are 10x. And so I think a more nuanced answer to the question is look at each of the firms that's in each of these companies and try and figure out what their multiple is at that point in time. As an example, we're a 10x shop, and for all of the public companies that we've had since our inception in 1999, we've never distributed off of lockup. We waited until we got to our bogey. We never, some cases didn't get to our bogey, but we got close enough where we started distributing. Some instances that was 5-10 years. But you just wait. So I think if you look across the entire universe of venture firms, I think you'd find most people waiting past lockup period. I don't think people blow things out just because they think it's time to get liquid.
I think the other thing is depending on how much of the company you own, whether you're chairman of the board, I mean, all sorts of reasons that you can't get out, even though theoretically your shares are locked up, you're still an insider. And so I think that I hope that there's a staged nature to this all. And I think if you look back at the companies over the last couple of years, and I use Clovis as an example, not that we're an investor, but some people sold in the teens and some people held it all the way to 60 and to 80. So I think that everyone has their own arguments about when they should sell, and that's not one. I mean, obviously that's been a great story, and hopefully we'll see more of those.
Yeah, a great example. I mean, it's public. The NEA was an investor with us in Farmington. They held until the company sold to Celgene, and it was a 7x on $40 million. I mean, that's incredible patience. They were up and down a lot, but that was the chairman of the company, and he believed in the company.
Does the public market dynamic alter the negotiations that you guys are having with entrepreneurs? I know I did a panel a couple weeks ago. Bruce Booth mentioned that he had an entrepreneur come into him recently and say, well, Bluebird or Agios is worth $1 billion and they're preclinical, and well, so am I, so I'm worth at least 10% of that. And of course, venture capitalist response is, oh no, you're worth pennies on the dollar. Are you guys seeing things like that?
Yes, absolutely.
Entrepreneurs thinking that they can drive a harder bargain?
Yeah, no, somebody asked me the other day, boy, this is a great market, so you must be incredibly busy seeing all kinds of great deals. And so it's actually, unfortunately good or bad. It's really much better for us as venture capitalists when the market sucks because, realistically, the companies need to get financed. And we have the money to finance them, and we actually have the time. It's kind of like a crazy real estate market that we're living in right now in Palo Alto. You want a house in Palo Alto, you see it, you got to buy it. That's it. Otherwise, you can forget about it. So in days when people aren't out there buying it, you can think about it, you can negotiate. I'll look at 5 others. I prefer that. But right now, I'm seeing I've had plenty of companies come in and say, we're about to file our IND and we're going to be going public in about 3 months. So you want to jump on the train, or do you want to watch it from the seats?
I think, so I think that there's still a lot of understanding that in our industry, it requires a lot of capital and a lot of time and a lot of risk. I think if we have markets like they have been this year for 5 years, for some period of time, then I think we'll see more and more of that. But I think the reality is that the pricing dynamic for most, early stage things, we were talking about earlier how there's 10 to 20 firms. There's not that much supply of capital. And I think most of the firms, we talked earlier about what most firms' numbers have been. I think a lot of people are still cognizant and cautious of that. So I don't see a lot of price inflation, because if we do that, we'll get killed. We as the industry cannot afford to do it, because this is a high risk business. This is a business that requires a lot of capital and a lot of time. I mean, and you have to recognize that the valuations of what we do, right? It's a very different than if you look at the tech world, and the speed that transactions happen in the tech world, the valuations that happen in the tech world is just a completely different animal than than life science.
There are also a lot more VC firms in the tech world, and so if you've got a hot entrepreneur with a hot idea, you know he really can go across the street and get financed.
That's true.
Not really true in biotech.
Well, I think what Leslie's saying is right for a pure startup. Again, what I'm seeing are people that have been in business and have raised money, and I tell you that their investors and their boards are all saying, you know, that company just went public last week. You guys are a way better story than that. And if they went public, there's no question you can do the same thing. I see it. I'm seeing plenty.
Yeah, I think the comment that we made earlier about management teams being much more experienced, every management team has seen these cycles too, right? So I think that management teams understand what is inherent value, fundamental value, and they realize if they have enough capital and they get, you know, the product works, they're going to make a lot of money, whether the valuation is 10 million pre-money or 50 million pre-money when they start. And so I think that we're aligned with management teams ultimately that have been around the block.
You guys seeing a lot of good ideas out there? What excites you these days?
I can't tell you that.
Sure you can. The microbiome.
Yep, I'm seeing good. I've seen some good microbiome. A couple, not a lot.
Everybody talks about the microbiome. You know, there's a handful of companies that have gotten started. You know, it's one of those areas where you say, hey, it seems like it's a great fundamental thing, and it might be. What exactly that means as far as how that turns into drugs or not,
Right.
I think it'll be interesting to see how that area sort of fundamentally evolves and moves forward. But you know, and again, you know, caveated in saying that I'm, you know, terribly optimistic. I think there's great, just fundamental great science in translational medicine that's happening. I don't think there's like a huge number of ideas. I don't think that you can have 100. And I'm talking about new startups, not sort of later companies. I don't think there's not that much ideas to have 100 fantastic, new, deep, big product engine companies that can be created. But there's a lot, and I think, you know, we're living. Sure, you said, you know, Renaissance. You know, be very cautious of it. I think caution is appropriate. At the same time, because I am an optimist, I'll go in and sort of say, I think we are actually entering a new golden age on drug discovery and our ability to translate it into medicine, and much higher probability of technical success, and in drugs that can really make a huge difference. I think there's a couple, you know, question marks out there that are big and that are, you know, one is there's some areas that we just haven't penetrated yet, like Alzheimer's disease, or, you know, that are really important because we've got major issues as a society, as a world, and we need to solve, and we haven't solved them yet. So I think there's some huge areas that we need to do a lot better on. And then more macro for our industry, whereas in the past, you know, a few years ago, we were really worried about regulatory issues. I think that is always important, but less of the core focus. I think now the big existential focus moves into reimbursement issues. And, you know, we're going through a huge tectonic shift here in the United States in how our healthcare system works. And, you know, October 1st was the enrollment period. 2014 in the fall, when these plans, you know, all kick on, the accountable care organizations, that's when things are really going to start to change. And they change progressively across late 14, 15, 16. And honestly, nobody knows how it's going to work. So I don't care what side of the political spectrum you are, you know, it simply is, we are changing the way that the system works, and things will change, and we don't know what that is. And that's, you know, one needs to think about that in company creation right now, in company building, in transactions. And for entrepreneurs that are out there, for venture capitalists and doing what we're doing, the best insulation to that is having a product that is going to be unbelievably important and clear, that it is really making a difference. Because if you're doing that, it's going to work in the system, you're going to figure it out. I think in this period of time, things that are not that are going to have a lot of trouble.
And so you're talking about pricing there. I mean, basically, you do that, and you set the price. You don't do that, and somebody's going to put the squeeze on you.
And if you're getting the squeeze put on you, then there might not be enough value. It might be a very negative investment for everybody involved. It might be a negative investment for the pharma company, so that nobody's going to buy you. The public stock market people looking at it might say, there's no way I'm going to make a return, I'm not going to invest in it, and you can hit a wall. right? I mean, the reality is, people in our society, you always get this angst about high-priced drugs. I love, the Medicare came out with the report this summer. I think it's one of the, sorry, not Medicare, the General Accounting Office of the government, and said that in Medicare, part of the reason we've had a slowing in the cost of growth in Medicare is actually because of the drug plan that was brought in. Because, as we have long said in our industry, that when people utilize drugs, it brings down other medical utilization, and so that net Medicare spending did not grow as fast as it had been budgeted that it was going to grow, right? Our industry, our use of drugs, even when they are high-priced drugs, are actually one of the most cost-effective, value-creating components of the healthcare system. So they're easy to point at because you say, wow, that's really expensive. But net on aggregate, what we do is actually incredible value. And we need to remember that and not be abashed about it.
Okay, I think that's a longer conversation. But we have a little time for some more questions from the audience in the back. No? What else is exciting? I mean, I touched on that, but I didn't hear everybody answer.
We just invested in our first gene therapy company ever, which I thought I may never see in my career.
Gene therapy. Wow.
So talk about coming back after 20 years, and the reality is now there's data out there that at least clinically that demonstrates gene therapy can work. So whether that's a major trend or still isolated products, I think that's a question.
Well, we just invested in a company called Avaxia, which is an oral anti-TNF, which is, of course, very exciting for us.
People have been trying that for a long time. You think they've
yes.
got it figured out?
We're betting on it.
Okay. Is there a question in the front here?
I'm not sure if I really heard this, but I might have. I thought I heard that if it's a big medical need like Alzheimer's, everyone kind of understands that's going to get funding if somebody's going after that. But if it's a small need, a niche thing, then you better make money. I mean, money seems to be the main object. Could I have heard that?
No, I mean, I think what drives our industry, or I'll speak just for myself personally, drives me is finding medicines that are going to make a difference for patients and work for our overall healthcare system and be fundamentally important, right? I think what I was saying is if you create a medicine that is giving fundamental value, then our system, even while it's changing, will reimburse for that, will pay for that.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, it's the lens, quite frankly, it's the lens we have to look at for all parts of the system, right? Whether it's the payers, whether it's FDA, whether it's the pharmaceutical companies who ultimately, hopefully buy these companies, it's got to be differentiated product, which means clinically meaningful benefit above and beyond what's currently there. And we're actually, as venture capitalists, we're interested in the niche markets because the niche markets allow us to actually go all the way through to approval and maybe even commercialize if we have to. We're not beholden to a company coming in and partnering with us or buying the company and just be stuck in no man's land. The larger markets on the Alzheimer's, I think what Lex was saying is that there's so much more that needs to get done for that to be viable for the most part for us as investors to go into, because there's when you're going into an investment where you have to do a phase 3 study to figure out if you got anything, it's a little bit of a problem for us.
Right. Real quick at the end, what do you guys worry about the most these days? Do you guys follow this whole sequester and government shutdown business, whacking of the NIH? Is that a serious long-term concern for the industry?
I worry about the debt default in the short term. But that seems like an incredibly stupid thing. Right? I mean, you want to sort of
market will crash, right?
Short-term worries. What a great way to destroy an economy that was otherwise, I think, fundamentally sound. Certainly for our industry, getting a lot better, growing sort of slowly over time. I think in a bigger term thing, let's hope that senses are regained and that we don't default on the debt and something stupid really doesn't happen. I really would like, sort of all of our people's representatives in Washington to shut up and remember this isn't a game. This is actually, they're there to govern. But in the long run, NIH, again, this is a wealthy country. We are, if we don't mess it up, we will be growing well. One of the things that has been great is our willingness as a society to plow things back into basic research. So I think NIH budget being cut back, sequester on it, that's just, it's stupid on society. What do people want? People want to live healthy, long lives. They want to sort of square the box. Live long and live healthy with high quality of life out. That's one of the most important, valuable things. That's what enables everything else to thrive. People understand that deeply on a personal level, on their family level. The money we put into NIH is a drop in the federal budget. It's one of the best investments we've ever made as a society. Not doing that, not investing in that, right? That's silly. It's stupid. We should be doing that. It's something that all of us, right, as an industry broadly, should be very, very active and vocal and concerned about.
I don't hear that much activeness or vocalness coming out of the industry about this. It surprises me. Why is that?
We haven't been very good at being an activist industry, right? I mean, we're not. It's a relatively small portion of the industry that is very, very vocal and engaged. Well, a lot of that is because we're a bunch of nerds, right? And dorks and geeks, and we love the science, and we're working on really, really hard problems, and it takes a lot of the time, and it's really risky stuff, and most of us in companies are massively cash-losing companies, and so the notion of devoting time to sort of the public I mean, who's got the time to do that?
But Bio does do it.
Bio does do it.
Pushes it pretty hard, and NVCA, National Venture Capital Association, does do it. But it's just two voices, so we just need more megaphone.
I'm talking about guys like you up here on the panel.
Oh, so we're both on the Bio board.
We're both on the Bio board.
We both do
Yeah.
this. Yeah.
And we encourage more people to be active. I mean, Bio is it's a gem of an organization, and I'm not just saying that because I'm on the board and that this is a Bio investor conference, but it does an enormous amount for all of the companies, large and small, in the organization in so many ways. And to your point, I think a lot of people don't actually realize how much that Bio does. And Bio, puts it out and it goes into a lot of people's spam folders and trying to say what it does, and people sort of ignore it. But we actually have people pay attention to what we say because we do a lot of good things for people. And I think we as an industry, we don't do everything right, but we've done a lot of things right, and we have a lot of credibility for that. And what gives us the best credibility are the thousands of companies and entrepreneurs and physicians and patients and advocates that are out there that say this is important. And the more that we all do to mobilize that and be active in that, the more of an impact we can have.
Well, the conference organizers are going to love you for your little bio. I think we're out of time, so we've got food and drink out in the foyer. Please, everybody, thanks to our panel for a lively conversation.